Hi everyone, welcome to Technology World Hub. My name is Anil. So in this section, we are going to discuss one important concept, that is how to work with frames in Selenium. This is also one of the important interview question you will face. So let's start this. How to work with frames in Selenium. Yeah. So if you will see here, in Selenium WebDriver, frames or iframe elements are used to embed another HTML document inside a web page. So what happens basically? Like in Selenium WebDriver, frames are present in another HTML document. Okay, and that is kind of named as iframe. Selenium cannot directly interact with elements inside a frame until you switch the driver context to that frame. Okay, here is a complete guide. So let's first discuss types of frames. So there are two types of frames. One is iframe. As I mentioned, the tag name will be iframe so that you can understand it is a frame. Inline frame and frame, older frame tag, rarely used. So maximum time, most of the times, you can see the tag name will be iframe. So that's how we will define a frame. Okay, inside a web page. Then how exactly will switch to a frame? Selenium provides driver.switch2.frame methods. So with the driver.switch2.frame method, we can switch to a frame. Then in different ways, we can switch to a frame and we can interact. Like switch by index. Driver.switch2.frame, you will pass the index number. That is switch to the first frame. Let's say 0th index means first frame. Driver.switch2.frame of 0. Then switch by name or ID. So driver.switch2.frame will pass frame name or frame ID. Name or ID attribute of the frame. Okay. Then switch by web element. So what we'll do first, we'll find out the web element. Web element, let's say frame element is equal to driver.findElement by.xpath. Let's say /iframe at the ID is equal to frame ID. Okay. Then driver.switch2.frame of frame element with the web element. So we can switch by index, we can switch by name or ID, or we can switch by web element. So next, interact with elements inside the frame. After switching, how will interact? Once switched, you can interact normally. Like in normal way, we can interact with the frame. So like driver.findElement by.id, then .send keys hello frame. So normal way we can interact once we switch. Then how can we switch back? Switch back to main content. After finishing with the frame, we can write down driver.switch2.defaultContent. If we write down default content, driver.switch2.defaultContent, then we can back to main page. Suppose we want to come to the parent one, or to switch to the parent frame if frame are nested, then driver.switch2.parentFrame. That's how. Okay, for main frame, driver.switch2.defaultContent, and for parent frame, driver.switch2.parentFrame. Okay. Then handling nested frames. How exactly we have, let's say, nested frames, different frames are there. Then how can we handle that? For frames inside frames, that means nested frame. So frames inside frames, that is inside nested frame. How we will handle that? So switch to outer frame. Then we can write down driver.switch2.frame outer frame name. Okay, outer frame. Okay. Then switch to inner frame. Driver.switch2.frame inner frame. Then interact inside inner frame. Once we switch to the inner frame, how will we interact? Like driver.findElement by.id, let's say anything, .send keys, nested frame. Normal way we can interact. Once we switch, we can normal way we can interact. Back to outer frame. Driver.switch2.parentFrame. Okay, because from inner to outer means parent. Driver.switch2.parentFrame. Then back to main frame, driver.switch to .defaultContent. Example, complete guide, let's say. So WebDriver driver is equal to new Chrome driver, driver.get https, let's say example.com, switch to frame by id, driver.switch to .frame, frame1, let's say. Interact inside frame, driver.findElement by .id, text box dot send keys, let's say hello. Then switch back to main frame, driver.switch to .defaultContent. Continue with other elements on main page. Let's say driver.findElement by .id .click. Then what we can what we learn here, always switch to frame before interacting, otherwise you get no such element exception. Okay, use default content to return to the main document. For nested frames, switch step by step, like one frame at a time. Okay, so that's it for frames. It is one of the important concept in Selenium WebDriver. That's how we work with frames in Selenium. So that's it, guys. So I will come up with some new topic. Till then, take care. Bye bye. Please like it, share it, subscribe it. Thank you so much, guys.